Do you think you have to get it together before you're ready to find your person? Are you waiting to feel fully healed before you believe you're ready for real intimacy? And do you secretly think that the version of you that's still imperfect and a work in progress doesn't deserve real love yet? Most of us have been taught that love is something that you qualify for once you're proven yourself good enough or attractive enough or successful enough. And for people on a healing journey, that can translate into thinking that you need to be healed in order to be ready for love or to even put yourself out there. Once you've cleaned up your side of the street, released all your pain and shame, learned how to perfectly regulate your nervous system, made peace with your past, you found your voice, you've built boundaries, you've mastered your triggers, and then you'll be the best version of yourself. And then someone will finally choose you and stay. But love is not a reward for healing. It's actually where the deepest healing gets activated if you let yourself be seen before you're done healing. If you let yourself be seen with your pain and your shame and your imperfection and your mess in progress, because that's when relational healing can complete in relationship. We can only heal relational wounds to a certain degree before we need relationships to fully resolve them. We can do all the self-love and the self-acceptance and the self-empowerment and the self-regulation, but relational wounds don't completely heal and resolve in isolation. But many people are scared of that aspect of healing, or they misuse that aspect, like wanting someone else to heal them, which is not relational healing. So in today's episode, we're going to unpack why healing has become a socially acceptable way to avoid intimacy, and how to stop feeling like you have to be quote unquote ready for love when you're still healing, so that you can trust yourself to be met by love by learning that your visibility and that being in connection are not a threat to your healing. You may be unintegrated. You may still carry some shame and some wounds, but you still deserve love. Welcome to The Simple Source, a paradigm-shifting space where self-love, healing, spirituality, and personal growth are redefined. If you've been told healing takes years, that abundance must be attracted, or that transformation requires struggle, you haven't been told the truth. I'm Linda Villines, a certified trauma-informed holistic coach, author, and spiritual guide. After healing myself from chronic conditions, complex trauma, and lack, not by following traditional frameworks, but by creating my own, I'm now teaching you to love, heal, and free yourself, mind, body, and soul, so you can reclaim your highest health, happiness, and potential with joy and ease. Each week, we go beyond surface-level self-help and into the real mechanics of transformation. If the traditional paths to healing and spirituality haven't produced the changes you want in the life you desire, you're in the right place. You were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. Let's get started with today's episode. You don't need to be fully healed or perfect to deserve connection or care or closeness. What you need is enough honesty with yourself and another person so that the love can reach the real you, not a version of you that's performing your highest self or trying to hold it all together. Love isn't something you earn after healing. It's how the unintegrated parts of you can actually begin to reorganize in a relationship. So throughout this episode, we're going to dismantle that belief that healing must come before you put yourself out there in order to be truly loved, that your mess somehow disqualifies you from what you want, that being loved before you feel ready is somehow unsafe, because it isn't. What's actually unsafe is only allowing yourself to be loved when you're perfect or polished, because that's never going to happen. And that just reinforces the wounded behavior of abandoning yourself in order to be seen or met or touched and loved. So I'm doing this episode because I'm in a multidimensional relationship with my twin flame's highest self. And it's been such a journey of integration, I suppose. And after my last relationship ended, I intentionally took a few years off from dating to focus on myself, on my career, my purpose, and to really fall in love with myself. Now, I don't regret that time. I don't regret doing that. But what I did was subtly create this unconscious belief that a relationship doesn't fit into my life as it is now, because I spent so much time deprioritizing a relationship with someone else to prioritize a relationship with myself, that now making space and room for a relationship is asking me to rearrange stuff that I had solidified in the past few years as precious and invaluable to me, like practices and routines. And so I basically got to a place where I was embodying my highest self on my own and consistently, and feeling really anchored in that. And now what's happening is I'm being invited to show up in relationship as my highest self, to put into practice what I've healed on my own, to integrate it with another, to show up with what I've healed fully and what I have not yet fully healed, and to risk not being perfectly embodied as my highest self all the time in that relationship. And that within itself has been incredibly healing. The majority of wounds and traumas occur in relationship, which means they ultimately have to be healed in relationship as well. Of course, it's incredibly important to do as much self-healing as you can do on your own. I mean, that's just essential to build self-trust, to foster unconditional self-love, to create inner safety and stability. But a lot of people swing to one extreme of the other, right? They either treat healing as something that happens in isolation, or like they take self-healing literally, or they enter relationships believing the relationship will do the healing for them. Like the other person's love will somehow fix what's wrong or unresolved in them. And neither of that is true. Self-healing, even when you're working with relational wounds and traumas, means you commit to healing your internal beliefs and responses, your emotional patterns, your identity in relationship, your capacity to stay present and honest in connection. That doesn't mean that you outsource that responsibility to another person, and it also doesn't mean that you do that in isolation. Now, yes, solitude is essential for self-healing. Of course it is, but so is being in relationship. And many people avoid transitioning their healing into relationship until they think that they have healed like so much, like enough in order to do that. But what matters in relationship isn't that you have healed enough to be in relationship. It's that you are conscious in relationship of your healing, and that awareness becomes integrated in how you show up, so that you are available for real love and unavailable to love that hinders your healing. Because when healing is treated as something you have to finish before you are allowed to be in relationship, it stops being awareness and it starts becoming a maladaptive form of self-protection. Instead of asking, how am I showing up in relationship with what I'm still healing? You think, have I healed enough yet to be chosen? That's really the subconscious question. Now, that's a very big difference, because it turns healing from a living relational practice into a prerequisite for what you want. Beliefs like, once I stop being so anxious, I'll finally be ready. Once I heal my attachment style, then I can be with someone who is secure. Once I learn how to enforce boundaries, then I'll stop being available to the wrong people. If you have beliefs like that, you may think that's like growth or taking personal responsibility, but it's actually a form of self-rejection, because if your nervous system only gets to relax and experience relational love after you have quote unquote fully healed, like if love only becomes available after you've become more palatable or more desirable in some way, then healing has become another way to hide yourself. It just reinforces your unintegrated shadow. It doesn't liberate them. It doesn't integrate those parts of yourself that you deem unworthy. And so that quote unquote unworthiness that you think that you have or is a part of you is just being reinforced as being contingent on someone else, if that makes sense, right? You're putting your worthiness into someone else's opinion of how lovable you are. And that's not what your worth is contingent on. Now, if you relate to that, none of that is like, you're not to blame, you're not to fault. You've just probably been taught that emotional safety is something you have to earn, like being more put together, being more pleasing to be with gets you more love, more access to people, and permission to stay in connection. But that's not healing, that's bracing, that's editing your authentic self to meet some imagined standards instead of being met where you actually are. And that same distortion that says I need to be healed to be chosen, that just shows up everywhere. It leaks into friendships as well as like a feeling of I don't want to be a burden. And into your family dynamics, when you think they've already seen me fall apart too many times, so I'm just going to show up chiller now, and into your creative relationships or collaborations is I have to show up fully confident or I'm going to lose credibility. And even in spirituality, as the belief of I should clear all of this quote unquote negative karma before I can be my highest self. But the truth is, you're not bound to karma, friend. Karma is a distorted spiritual framework. Yes, I said it. Yes, it's true. And all of that distortion just reinforces the false idea that coherence is cultivated in isolation. But it's actually really fully calibrated and integrated through connection. Your nervous system doesn't regulate through solitude alone. It actually regulates through accurate, attuned, and honest connection. Accurate and honest means showing up before you've cleaned yourself up to be perfect. And from an attachment perspective, secure bonds don't require perfection. People with secure attachment styles are not perfect. They just, they're more honest. Secure bonds, they allow conflict and repair. They hold complexity. They don't flatten it into quote unquote, a secure attachment means we're both perfect and we've healed all of our shit perfectly. And that myth, again, has been so unintentionally reinforced in spirituality through the concept of the dark night of the soul and the idea that healing happens alone in solitude and a cocoon phase. And, all of that just translates into people avoiding other people while they're healing because it gives people silent permission to follow the logic of if no one sees my mess, then I don't have to face the shame that I might be too much or not enough. But we're not designed to heal in isolation or in hiding. Self-love is not loving yourself in separation from others. It's the foundational practice that says, I can be with my whole self with love so that you can meet my whole self with healthy love too. Now let's take a look at this myth that you can't be truly ready for or be loved until you're fully healed through the lens of neuroscience. So when you're living in chronic sympathetic activation, meaning hypervigilance or constant self-monitoring, when you're anticipating, fucking up, someone else fucking up, when you're trying to correct yourself in real time, your nervous system is not organized for connection that way. It's organized for survival. And in that state, you're not relating from presence, you're relating from protection. Meaning your system is tracking how you're coming across, right? It's trying to manage impact, risk, and trying to prevent rejection before it happens. Not because you're intrinsically flawed and not because you're intentionally trying to be inauthentic, but because your body learned that connection was unsafe for your authentic self in some way in your early childhood. And you don't recondition those past patterned reflexes by becoming quote unquote more perfect or more healed. You recondition them through connection. So in polyvagal theory, the nervous system doesn't learn safety in isolation or through self-regulation alone. It learns safety through co-regulation, through consistent attuned relational contact that tells your nervous system and your body being in connection is safe. I can be held safely in connection. So co-regulation isn't something that you get because you've healed perfectly, right? It's not a byproduct of healing perfectly. Co-regulation is a biological requirement for healing. So that means you don't wait until your body feels safe before you receive love. Your body learns what safety is because love met you even before you felt fully ready, before you felt like perfect as your highest self or whatever, before those shameful parts of yourself felt certain that you deserved love as your whole authentic self. So the truth is, by healing, you're not like becoming someone who finally deserves love. Healing is remembering that you were always deserving. And that's actually the freedom that you get to when you heal. It's understanding that even when you were feeling insecure, even when you shut down, even when you got activated and said, said the wrong thing, that remembering, which is a reclamation of your wholeness through the freedom of unconditional love, that doesn't just change how you date or how you show up for potential connection. It changes how you breathe inside your own body. It changes how you know and you carry yourself. It makes love feel less like something you earn and more like a sense of home, even before all of your mess is cleaned up, because you love yourself, including all of your mess. Because if you think that you only get to be loved once you're healed, you're going to spend your whole life trying to heal something that's already lovable. You are already perfectly lovable exactly as you are in your mess. And the tragedy of not understanding that or believing that is a tragedy, because you never get to experience the full spectrum of what it is to be your highest self, because you are waiting to become your highest self in isolation, because you've put your highest self on this pedestal, and on that pedestal is the only time that you get to real love. And that's not true. So let me lay out some truths. You are allowed to show up messy and uncertain in love. You don't lose your right to connection just because you're like, quote unquote, in process. You're still allowed to want closeness when you're spiraling. You're still allowed to reach for someone when you feel flooded by shame. And you're still allowed to need warmth when you feel ugly. But most people were raised in environments where conditional love was the norm. Even if your parents or your caregivers loved you, loved each other unconditionally, that love was expressed and engaged with conditionally. What many people were taught through unhealthy, unconditional love, meaning unconditional love that requires conditions to be expressed or witnessed, was to put on your best face, right? To make yourself more digestible or likable. And then that was when love was reliable. Now, what's interesting is that even in the spiritual space, which includes, all those popular manifestation frameworks, that actually gets reinforced with the teachings that say, you attract what you are, or your partner reflects your shadows and your unhealed wounds, or you have to embody the frequency of love in order to receive it. And all of that translates into you don't get what you want until you are perfect, because your mess makes you unlovable until you fix it, basically. But all of that just enforces a belief system that promotes self-abandonment. So what you need to hear right now, friend, is you can be in shame and still show up as your highest self. You can feel uncertain in the moment and still be met by love. You can be flawed. You can have contradictions and still be your highest self and get what you want. Because your highest self does not equal perfection or the most spiritual version of you. In your human form, your highest self is your fully integrated mind, body, and soul, fully authentic and fully connected to your divinity and highest truth self. That does not equate to being perfect all the time, making no mistakes, being fully healed so there's zero echo of trauma in every single second of your life. Your nervous system doesn't require perfection to regulate. It requires real, present, honest contact, connection. Dysregulation isn't healed through isolation alone, certainly doesn't heal through overanalysis. It's healed through consistent signals of safety, especially when you become dysregulated. And so according to attachment theory, our systems are wired to seek connection during moments of distress, not after we've intellectually resolved them internally on our own first. In other words, closeness, connection is the medicine, not the reward. And the most healing breakthroughs or moments often don't happen when we're like composed and we have all of our shit together. They happen in the rupture, in the overwhelm, in the moments where a younger part of you who was hurt shows up and someone doesn't walk away, even when that happens. Not because you tried to cover it up, right? Play it cool, but because you let them see that part of you and then they stayed and they loved you for it. That's what your nervous system needs to fully heal relational wounds, not years of hugging your inner child in your mind's eye in isolation. That's the foundation. That's not the end. Because when someone sees you with all of your mess and doesn't reject you, abandon you, ghost you, doesn't judge you, doesn't diminish you, but just fucking loves you without trying to fix you, but loves you exactly as you are, and then attunes to you with real presence, that's when your nervous system reorganizes. That's when it starts to go, oh wait, love is safe. Being loved is safe. Being loved exactly as I am is safe. And that doesn't happen because you become easier to love. It happens because you finally let love hold the parts of you that you believed that you had to hide in order to be loved. So your messiness, your shame, your imperfection are not liabilities. They are actually access points to deep relational healing, but only if you are willing to let yourself be seen, real and whole and true. Now, let's talk about shame for a moment because it's at the root of why people don't think that they can really be loved until they're fully healed. So when you contract, when someone gets too close to a part of you that you have not forgiven or loved or integrated yet, that's shame. When there's tension behind that fake ass smile when you're pretending to be okay, that's also shame. And for a lot of people, shame is the reason love feels threatening. Not because love is inherently unsafe, but because being seen in love means that the parts of you that you have tried to hide may not stay hidden. So what most people do to not be seen in their shame, for their shame to stay hidden, is they delay real intimacy, or they make healing a prerequisite, thinking in some way I'm going to show up when I'm less shameful. And that could look like choosing to date people that you ultimately know, on a deep level, are not really aligned with your true self or what you really want in a partner. It could look like settling for dead ends, right? Or almost, essentially, as a form of self-protection. It could look like having a lot of sex and not pursuing or being open to real relational commitment, or you saying that you want to find someone, but you don't really put yourself out there. Shame from a trauma perspective isn't just an emotion, it's a physiological posture. It contracts your whole body. It constricts your breathing. It pulls your gaze downward, right? It makes it difficult to hold eye contact. It literally turns you inward. It makes you physically smaller. And the belief underneath the feeling is, I am not safe to be seen because who I am is bad. And your nervous system, of course, is going to respond to that accordingly by guarding, by avoiding, disconnecting, disassociating. But again, shame does not dissolve in isolation. It reorganizes through accurate, non-shaming connection and contact. And research in attachment science confirms that when a part of you holds shame, it actually doesn't need fixing. It needs resonance. That means it needs to be met with, I see this part of you and I'm not leaving. I still love you. You are still good and worthy and whole. That is what starts to rewire and release shame. Not understanding it from every angle or having the perfect insight, certainly not controlling it so that it never sees daylight, and not silence. Now, to be clear, shame is not evidence that you are unworthy. A lot of people mistake that. A lot of people have that unconscious misconception. Feeling like you're a bad person does not mean that you are a bad person. Shame is just a somatic signal that there is some sort of a gap between what you're actually feeling and needing and how you believe that you're supposed to show up to be loved or stay connected. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's just your nervous system trying to protect a part of you that learned at some point that being really fully truthful was not safe. So what if shame didn't cause you to collapse? What if you said, I'm I'm still ashamed of this part of myself, but I'm not going to exile it anymore. I'm going to let it be loved. That is actually when real connection becomes possible for you, because you're connected to yourself. And then that allows you to be connected to other people in an authentic way. Because real love cannot meet you when you're wearing a mask. If you want real love, you have to be willing to be met as your whole authentic and real self. For example, if you're in a relationship and a familiar insecurity shows up, like maybe you're feeling needy or jealous or unsure or afraid of being too much, what you may tend to do is tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this way, and then you go quiet, or you act distant, or you start overcompensating by people pleasing or being agreeable, or you explain it away so that no one ever actually sees it and that you don't have to feel it. But choosing not to exile, abandon, reject that part of yourself may look like telling your partner or the other person, I'm noticing I'm feeling really insecure right now, and I don't fully understand it yet, but I don't want to pretend that I'm fine either. Now, when you say that and you offer your truth, you're not asking the other person to fix you, and you're also not collapsing into it. You're just letting the truth exist in yourself and between you. And that's when real connection becomes possible, because now you're not asking to be loved through some mask, through some edited version of you. You're letting your authentic self be met in real time as you are. And real love can only respond to what's actually present. And that's how you start learning how to receive love, even when you feel messy and imperfect and unlovable or uncertain. Being loved where you don't love yourself is what is healing for your nervous system and relationship. But you must be available for that reciprocity. And many people are uncomfortable in those situations because it can feel like pressure or a threat, especially when that love touches a part of you that you feel ashamed about. And so people have difficulty receiving real love, even when it's being offered. And that's not because you're like necessarily being ungrateful or you're intentionally closing off. It's because your nervous system was trained to perceive love as conditional. So when love comes toward a part of you that still believes that it's unlovable, your system doesn't automatically open and relax. It prepares for criticism, for abandonment, for rejection, shame, distortion. So you may shut down, or deflect, disassociate, shapeshift into a version of you that you think is easier to love because that part of you has only ever been loved with conditions. Now, in psychological terms, that's called incongruent receiving, when you're technically being held, essentially, but you can't feel held because the part of you that needs it most is still hiding behind fear or shame. Now, it's not that you don't want to receive love, it's that your nervous system hasn't learned that it's safe to stay in contact while exposed or being vulnerable. And attachment science reveals that when love shows up, where there was once neglect or abuse or emotional enmeshment or distortion, the body leans toward familiarity, not identifying what is actually truly safe in the moment. Meaning, if love doesn't feel like what you're used to, like what you had to survive it or through, your system flags that as suspicious. Not because it's wrong, not because it's unsafe, but because it's unfamiliar. That's why people often pull away from secure connection, not because they inherently reject it on a soul level, but because it doesn't match their nervous system's blueprint for how they had to survive and love in relationships in the past. That must be healed in a relationship. And learning to stay in connection even when you are being seen, like particularly the parts of yourself that you think are ugly or shameful, is of course greatly benefited by you learning to stay with yourself with love when those shadow aspects, when that shame surfaces. But you must integrate that self-love and self-acceptance in relationship to fully heal that relational wound. And the goal is not to convince yourself that you are lovable. It's loving yourself, so like for real, so that when someone else loves you for real, that love can land. So now I want to briefly talk about the other side of this spectrum that I mentioned earlier, which is, the opposite of what we've been talking about, which is expecting a relationship to heal you and being in relationship hoping that the other person heals you. Now, that's not a conscious thought most of the time. It's subconscious codependent thinking. So there's a difference between being supported in your healing and handing someone else the responsibility for your wholeness. Most people are not aware that they have handed their wholeness, handed their worthiness to someone else. Like, it's one thing to say, I feel safer with you. And it's another thing to silently believe, if I stay with you, I won't have to face the parts of me that I don't want to face and I don't know how to hold, because you'll hold them and you're going to make me feel good enough and lovable then. That's not real healthy love. That's codependency, because you hand off your accountability to be whole in yourself by believing that someone else is going to complete you, complete your healing, or, shine light into the spaces of yourself that you've kept in shadow. And when you're in relationship with someone from that place, you're not really asking to be loved. You're essentially asking to be rescued. But no matter how well someone loves you, they can't metabolize your shame for you. They can't hold boundaries for you. They can't reparent your inner child. They can't integrate your shadow aspects. They cannot heal you or make you more worthy or lovable. And if you try to outsource that, the relationship, of course, is going to carry so much more pressure in terms of real intimacy and far more projection than real presence. So yes, love and relationships can be profoundly healing. They can co-regulate, reflect, awaken you, and soften your edges, but they cannot carry what you have refused to heal and feel yourself. They can't do the part of your healing that requires your full presence, your responsibility, your accountability, your self-love. The only person that deems you lovable and worthy is you. Your wholeness is innate. It is not dependent. Now, it's okay to need someone, but if your coherence depends on their closeness, that's not intimacy, that's codependency or enmeshment. And those are not the same things as real love. Real love doesn't complete you. It doesn't even adopt that mentality. It just calls you back to the parts that you have abandoned. But only you can walk the way home to yourself. And that's what healthy real love does. It amplifies your healing, your awakening, your potential, your remembrance of your highest self and truths. True aligned connection will absolutely surface what is unhealed. It's not going to bypass them, but the healing happens not because someone or the relationship fixes it or you. First of all, you're not broken. There's nothing to fix. So when you can recognize that relationships are a mirror, that mirrors that show you where you're not yet living in your truth, then that's when being in love accelerates your personal evolution and doesn't become some cure-all for your trauma that it can't be. Relationships are a living dynamic and a very clear mirror that shows you in real time where you're still hiding, still bracing, still repeating your past instead of transcending it. And from a nervous system perspective, that mirroring can feel just stabilizing for some people, because real love doesn't just have the capacity to soothe your dysregulation. It actually exposes it. Not to shame you, not to make you feel worse, but to give you a chance to stay with yourself while being seen as your whole, authentic, and yes, highest self too. When you can see yourself reflected back and not deny or avoid or defend or deflect, that's liberation, because that's when the healing you achieve on your own can integrate and finally resolve completely. So I hope this episode has helped you understand that you're not too messy to be loved, that you're not disqualified from love because you're still healing, and that healing doesn't earn you love. It actually teaches you how to stay open to and real in love as your whole, authentic, and highest self. So here's your action step for the week. I want you to make a 2-column list. And on the first column, you want to title that where I feel like I have to be healed first. And then under that, I want you to list all the specific situations and relationships where you find yourself holding back or hiding or waiting to be like more healed or less sensitive or more over it or better in some way before you feel like you can show up as your whole authentic self or fully invest. And then in the second column, I want you to title that, How I'll Show Up Messy on Purpose. And then under that, for each item that you put on column 1, on the second column next to it, I want you to just write down, name a small, tangible act of brave imperfection, not performance, not bypass, just one courageous thing you can do toward authenticity and connection while you're still, quote unquote, in process. So for example, on column 2, you could write, letting yourself be more quiet or more vocal in a group, depending on what you need, or sending that message that you have just been overanalyzing and picking apart without editing it anymore, or letting yourself express how you're feeling in a conversation that you've been avoiding. Now, column 2 is not about forcing connection or forcing disclosure or oversharing. It's about giving the part of you that usually hides just one moment of real contact and connection, even when you feel messy. Just a chance to belong, even when you still feel like you're healing and imperfect. Now, you want to make sure that you enact the stuff in column 2, meaning follow through, and then follow through without expectation. You're not doing the stuff in column 2 to get reassurance, to be chosen, or to be met in a specific way, or even to see if someone's going to finally respond to you the way that you want. The goal here is not the outcome. It's about loving yourself and starting to let go of that need for external validation to feel lovable and good enough. It's about you showing yourself, I can be brave and courageous as I am. This is about practicing integrity with yourself, showing up honestly because you no longer want to abandon all parts of you, regardless of how you are received in connection. And so the act of showing up imperfect and messy is the integration. So anything that happens when you do that is just information, okay? It's not proof of your worth. That's what I'm saying. So just keep that in mind. And so if you can demonstrate to yourself that you can show up messy in connection and still be worthy because you're holding your worth, then you're already healing in relationship. You're already practicing that you are lovable just as you are. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode awakened you, inspired you, and reminded you of what's possible when you love, heal, and free yourself and reclaim your highest truth and power. If this show has transformed or enlightened your self-love, growth, and healing journey, please like, save, and share this episode and leave a positive review on Apple or Spotify. And subscribe to be reminded of new episodes. Your support is deeply appreciated and truly helps this show so much. And if today's episode resonated with you, don't stop here. Go deeper. My book, Unconditional, You Are Perfect As You Are, expands on these teachings and gives you the missing framework about self-love that no one is talking about. So get your copy today to start reading and loving yourself more. And if you're ready for the ultimate healing journey with daily instruction and guidance from me, I'd love to see you inside the Source membership, the only holistic and comprehensive step-by-step self-healing program that is proven to work. Remember, you were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. It's time to claim everything you want and more. All the links are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.